Dus alles opnemen met uw telefoon is niet nodig. Daarmee wil ik dus ook graag zeggen of u nog even wilt checken of de telefoons uitstaan op vliegtuigstand. En na afloop nodigen we iedereen van harte uit voor de receptie. Ik zeg nu alvast dat ik heel graag zou willen dat op het moment dat de president de zaal verlaat, dat iedereen met zijn gevolg, dat zijn er nogal wat, dat u eventjes blijft zitten tot ze rustig de zaal uit zijn gegaan. U kunt zich voorstellen dat er een moordend schema is en er is alweer een afspraak hierna gepland. Het is een gesprek, een toespraak, een event vandaag in 3 talen. Dat is nogal gecompliceerd, complicated. De laatste keer dat ik het alle 3 ga doen, want daar zijn hier geweldige tolken voor die alles zullen vertalen in de taal die u het liefste wil. Ik zie al wat mensen op met een headset die dat nu nodig hebben. Maar je kunt op kanaal 1 Nederlands horen, op kanaal 2 Italiaans en op kanaal 3 Engels. Ik ga dat nu eventjes testen met u en dan ga ik het dus nog wel een paar dingen in de 3 talen zeggen. Zou u alstublieft even uw hand op kunnen steken als er iets niet goed is? Begin ik met te zeggen, ik wacht nog even tot de mensen de headsets op hebben. Ja, nee, ik heb nog niks gezegd, dus dan heel goed. Hartelijk welkom vandaag in Maastricht. Benvenuti a tutti oggi nella città di Maastricht. A very warm welcome in the city of Maastricht. Nou, de vingers blijven omlaag, gelukkig. Dat werkt dus allemaal. Dan, voordat we met Mathieu gaan spreken, gaan we eerst luisteren naar een speciale voordracht van Kiriko Mechanicus. Zij is culinair schrijver, dichter en documentairemaker. En ze maakt verhalen van alles wat mensen in hun mond stoppen. En het werk van haar gaat vaak over de maakbaarheid van het leven en zijn smaken. En momenteel werkt Kiriko aan een documentaire over de tomaat. En ze gaat daarin op zoek naar de Europese identiteit in de tomatenvelden van Puglia. Speciaal voor deze gelegenheid heeft zij een gedicht geschreven waarin de Nederlandse en de Italiaanse taal worden gebruikt. Daar zal geen vertaling van zijn, want we nodigen u uit om juist dit even te ervaren, deze tweetaligheid in dit gedicht. En het is mogelijk om na afloop op de website van Studio Europa het gedicht nog aandachtig te bestuderen. Kiriko, dan wil ik je heel graag nu uitnodigen om naar voren te komen voor jouw gedicht.
Vieni più vicino, zei hij. Sorry? Zei zij. Ti faccio vedere una cosa, zei hij. Sorry, I don't speak Italian, zei zij. Dai, vieni qui. Il pomodoro va mangiato subito, zei hij. Oké, zei zij. Ze deed wat de tomatenplukker zei. Ze pakte de tomaat vers van de plant en stak hem zo gelijk in haar mond. Nog warm van de Italiaanse zon. Alsof ze een levend orgaantje opat. Een kleine, rode microcosmos, diens smaak zich niet graag laat omschrijven. Maar als ze toch moest proberen, de smaak had van haar lievelingsvrucht. Di dove sei? Zei hij. Ik kom uit Nederland, zei zij. Hollanda? Ah, allora guarda che sei tornata a casa, eh? Zei hij. Lo sai che i semi dei pomodori vengono dall'Olanda? Sorry, ik versta je echt niet, zei zij. Non importa, zei hij. Il pomodoro e il cuore. Hai capito? Sì. Sì. Capito, zei zij. Wist je dat de plant van de tomaat giftig is? Zei zij. Als je de plant eet, heb je kans dat je hart ermee stopt. Of dat je geen adem meer krijgt, zei zij. Ah, ecco perché il pomodoro è così buono, zei hij. I frutti più buoni vengono sempre dalle piante velenose. Io sono la terra mediterranea e tu sei il seme olandese. Io sono il madre e tu sei il padre. La culla si trova a Maastricht. In questa terra è nato nostro figlio d'amore. Una frutta piccola, abbastanza giovane, blu, ricca nella sua potenza. Frutta che deve ancora crescere. Le punte tagliente delle stelle che devono ancora essere affillate. Alles wat lekker is geboren in vergif. Een zoete vrucht met een bittere oorsprong. Jij de mediterrane bodem en ik het sterke Hollandse zaad. Jij de moeder en ik ben de vader. De wieg, die staat in Maastricht. In deze grond is onze liefdesbaby geboren. Ons kind is een verse, relatief jonge vrucht. Blauw. Rijk in haar potentie. Een vrucht die nog groeien moet. Met scherpe punten van sterren die nog geslepen moeten worden. Lo senti il caldo? Il profumo di nostalgia? L'odore di ognuno per sé, prima che c'era la nostra frutta. L'Europa non si fa annegare dalla nostalgia. La nostra frutta ha bisogno di tempo. Una bandiera blu con un cosmo rosso, sradicata dal suo passato tossico. Voel je de hitte? Ruik je de nostalgie? De geur van ieder voor zich uit een tijd toen de vrucht nog niet bestond. Europa laat zich niet verdrinken in nostalgie. De zoetste vruchten hebben tijd nodig om te rijpen. Een blauwe vlag met een rode kosmos. Ontworteld van haar giftige verleden. Dankjewel. Grazie.
Hartelijk dank, Kiriko, voor je prachtige gedicht. Erg benieuwd naar de rest van je project, je documentaire. Ik noem het hier net een historische plek, maar eigenlijk is misschien dat wel mooier om het te hebben over de wieg van Europa die hier staat. We gaan straks horen van professor Mathieu Segers in hoeverre die wieg inmiddels een volwassen is, of nog af en toe wat een puber die het wat moeilijk heeft. We gaan het straks verder hebben over Europa. Maar eerst wil ik graag een video die we hier, die voorafgaand aan vandaag is gedeeld met het bredere publiek. Studio Europa Maastricht heeft 2 onderzoekers uitgenodigd om de context rond dit staatsbezoek te verduidelijken. Matteo Bonelli, assistant professor op het gebied van EU-recht, en Luana Russo, assistent professor in quantitative methods, vertellen ons meer over de rol van de president van Italië en de positie van Italië in de Europese Unie.
On November the 11th, the President of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, will give a speech on Maastricht. He is in the Netherlands for a state visit. In this video, we will explain who Sergio Mattarella is and why he is coming to Maastricht, the capital of Limburg, now. Let's go back in history for a moment. In February 1992, Italy became one of the founding members of the EU, as we know it today. With the establishment of the Maastricht Treaty, on behalf of Italy, Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti was present at the negotiations. To mark the 30th anniversary of this historic moment, Mattarella is now visiting Maastricht. Not only is he coming to Maastricht, he is also giving a speech in the building where the treaty was signed. To indicate the importance of his event, we brought in some experts.
President Mattarella has been now president since January 2015, so nearly 8 years now, but the mandate in Italy is 7. And he accepted a second mandate, and he has been the first one after his predecessor, Giorgio Napolitano, who, however, did that only for a very limited time. Sergio Mattarella accepted a second mandate because we were facing challenging circumstances, and the parties could not agree on any other name. He started his political career very early. He has always been a moderate, and he used to be a member of the Christian Democrat Party. And then in the 90s, he became vice prime minister and then minister of the defense. And in 2011, he became a member, a judge of the Constitutional Court, which in Italy is the highest court in terms of constitutional matters. In general, the president is a very beloved figure in Italy, and I think Sergio Mattarella perhaps even more, because he accepted the second mandate, showing this spirit of service, and he also had to face several crises, including the pandemic, so Italians are really grateful about that.
The President of the Republic is not directly elected by citizens, but by the two houses of parliament sitting together with a group of regional representatives. They vote the President at an absolute majority. The Italian President of the Republic does not have the same powers of directly elected presidents like the French one or the US President. But at the same time, it does not only have ceremonial powers, so to say, like the Dutch king or even the German President of the Republic. Presidents are there to guarantee the integrity of the Constitution, we could say. They, for example, have an important role in the formation and dissolution of governments, the dissolution of parliaments, but they can also appoint judges to the Constitutional Court, as well as temporarily block pieces of legislation that might not be in line with the Constitution itself. In recent years, President Mattarella, but also the previous president, have been very active in the Italian system because of the multiple crises that the Italian political system has faced. Now, in the new legislative term, the new ruling coalition, the majority seems to be more stable than previous ones, so it might be that the role of the president will decrease. At the same time, there is no doubt that the president will continue to play his role as a guardian of the Constitution, including also of European integration and of the European Union, which are commitments enshrined in the Italian Constitution.
President Mattarella's attitudes towards EU is unquestionably supportive. Well, the new Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, recently declared that Italy is a proud member of the NATO and of the EU. And I would say that at this point, it's actually a while that the exit of Italy from the EU, it's completely outside of the mainstream political discourse. This said, the two biggest parties in this new government coalition do not have a record of being EU enthusiasts, and they definitely embrace sovereignist stances. How these stances will unroll, we will just see in the next few months. It's too early to say.
Dan zou ik nu heel graag professor Mathieu Segers op het podium willen uitnodigen voor een gesprek. Welkom.
Dank je.
U bent historicus en hoogleraar hedendaagse Europese geschiedenis en Europese integratie aan de Universiteit in Maastricht. Lid van de Wetenschappelijke Raad voor het Regeringsbeleid en u schrijft artikelen voor diverse media. En U presenteert de podcast Café Europa. Italië was een van de 6 landen na de Tweede Wereldoorlog betrokken bij de Europese eenwording. Het wordt gezien als een van de grondleggers van de Europese integratie. Het was toen een relatief jonge staat, Italië, nog van geen eeuw oud, en zat na de Tweede Wereldoorlog natuurlijk in een turbulente periode, na 20 jaar fascisme. Wat was de rol van Italië in de eerste fase van de Europese integratie en waarom was die rol in het belang van Italië?
Ja, misschien met dat laatste te beginnen. Italië was net als de andere landen in West-Europa die begonnen met het proces van Europese integratie vooral op zoek naar veiligheid. Na de eerste helft van de 20e eeuw, de Eerste Wereldoorlog, de Tweede Wereldoorlog, het fascisme, het nationalisme, dat het continent in duigen had doen vallen, eigenlijk letterlijk. Het continent Europa, zocht men naar veiligheid. En Italië zocht net als de andere stichters van de Europese integratie niet alleen naar externe veiligheid, door samen te werken en een blok te vormen tegen dreigingen van de toekomst. Op dat moment kwam langzaam de Sovjet-dreiging in beeld na de Tweede Wereldoorlog als de belangrijkste dreiging voor de decennia na de Tweede Wereldoorlog, maar ook interne veiligheid. Dus het waarborgen van veiligheid voor je burgers en het voorkomen van voedingsbodems voor extremisme. En daarin was heel belangrijk om bijvoorbeeld armoede te bestrijden. En daar had Italië natuurlijk echt een hele grote uitdaging. Met name in Zuid-Italië. En men zag dat ook als een uitdaging die misschien het beste vorm kon worden gegeven in samenwerking met andere West-Europese landen. En daarom is Italië een van de 6 stichters van de Europese integratie. In 1951 met het verdrag voor de Europese gemeenschap voor kolen en staal. En de andere zijn natuurlijk Frankrijk, Duitsland en de Benelux-landen. Nederland, België en Luxemburg.
Nou, we hoorden het net al in het filmpje dat de president uitgesproken pro-Europa was. Wat was, ja, hij is ook eigenlijk inmiddels, hij is al heel lang een belangrijke figuur in Italië. Wat was zijn rol hierin?
Ja, Italië speelt een belangrijke rol, niet alleen als stichter van de Europese integratie, maar ook op 2 andere manieren. En daar speelt deze president eigenlijk ook een hele belangrijke rol in. Eerst even in algemene zin. Italië is een stichter van die Europese integratie en doet dat eigenlijk vanuit een perspectief op zoek naar veiligheid, heb ik al gezegd, maar ook iets extra's. Want net als Duitsland had Italië veel te verantwoorden met betrekking tot die eerste helft van de 20e eeuw en met name de Tweede Wereldoorlog. En net als Duitsland heeft Italië in zijn grondwet, we hoorden het net ook, eigenlijk verankerd dat die Europese integratie een integraal onderdeel is van de naoorlogse Italiaanse Republiek. Nou, en dan kom je in beeld, dan krijg je de president ook in beeld, want dat werd net ook heel goed uitgelegd. Die heeft als het ware een speciale verantwoordelijkheid om die grondwet in de gaten te houden. Constitutionele verantwoordelijkheid. En in die grondwet is dus die Europese integratie heel belangrijk. En Sergio Mattarella, die we vandaag te gast hebben, is een heel bijzondere voorvechter eigenlijk van die verantwoordelijkheid. Om 1 voorbeeld te geven, ik denk dat dat hem wel illustreert. Hij is geboren in 1941, is altijd betrokken geweest bij de Christendemocraten, die een soort belangrijke basis vormden onder dat Europese profiel van Italië, vanaf meet af aan. Hij is actief, zeker nu de laatste jaren, om te onderstrepen dat hij die verantwoordelijkheid voor de Europese integratie heel erg serieus neemt als president van Italië. Een voorbeeld, hij was vlak voor zijn benoeming in zijn 2e termijn, we hebben daar net over gehoord, dat dat best wel een bijzonder moment was, en we hebben het dan over de zomer van 2001.
Talked about the summer of 21. He especially traveled to the island before the coast of Naples, called Ventotene. In Ventotene were 2 Italians in exile during World War II, Altiero Spinelli and Ernesto Rossi, and they are the authors of the so-called Manifesto Ventotene. And I advise everyone to read it because it contains very actual information. Spinelli was a communist, but also focusing on how to stabilize Europe with collaboration. Spinelli's grave is on Ventotene, and Sergio Mattarella in the summer of 21 traveled there especially to say that there was a continuity which goes across the parties, transcending political contradictions. This is something in the interest of Italy, and carrying out this assignment, this European collaboration, is different in all circumstances. Mattarella made it clear that he is part of this tradition, and this Manifesto Ventotene, which is known as a birth certificate of European federalism, its content is something I try to translate into today's reality in my role as President of Italy. That says a lot about how he carries out this responsibility. We are here at a historic place. It was not only signed, but it was also negotiated. What was Italy's role in its negotiation? A very important one, apart from the fact that Italy was an engine room of ideas, like for the entire history of European integration. Italy was organizing the European Monetary Union. For example, the plan, which was the first proposal for at the end of the 80s, came from the French and Italian Minister of Finance, together with Mr. Amato, the finance minister in Italy at the time. That plan was a basis for negotiations, and these took place in the framework of a so-called intergovernmental conference, which takes several years, and the member states negotiated the new treaty. The heart of this intergovernmental was done by Italy itself. The two main moments in Italy, Rome 1 and 2, have been crucial, and all the preliminary work has been done. The work which was finalized here in Maastricht, and Giulio Andreotti played a crucial role in this. He was not only a person who determined the content for a large part in the intergovernmental conference, but he was also a political influencer. He ensured there was a date on which the euro was introduced, and that was very important in the 90s, in order not to only make the euro a plan, but actually integrate it. The euro was introduced in 1989, and many economists had a lot of initial problems. Italy is considered as the weakest link. Italy was used years before the introduction of the euro to devaluate the lira. I think a lot of people remember when they were going on holiday with a lot of liras, and not many countries believed that Italy would manage to get its budget in order before the introduction of the euro. How did Italy manage this? You now ask many questions at the same time. I think it is important that from a Dutch perspective to look at this. The Netherlands especially did not believe that Italy would make it. So the Netherlands has more often thought, had the wrong impression of Italy in history. Italy would be part of the integration of the European Union. Doesn't mean that Italy is without problems. There are sometimes main concerns about the economy in Italy, and they were present there as well. Moving forward to the Treaty of Maastricht, especially in the years when the euro had to be introduced, one of the main things which played a crucial role each time is that the financial markets gave a signal at those times of European integration. When we talk about these themes, economic and monetary, do we have faith in it or not? What you saw in the 90s was that the financial markets had a lot of confidence in the political commitment of Helmut Kohl, François Mitterrand, and Giulio Andreotti in the euro. They thought it was serious, and it indicates how important it is to give political legitimacy to such a project as the euro and the European Monetary Union, because they believed the European financial markets that believed in this political commitment. They they set off the part of the Italian economy as part of the European Eurozone. Consequence of this was that the interest of Italy plummeted. We looked upon Italy as a country of Germany because the interest was decreasing. For Italy, also the costs decreased, and the budget deficit came near 3%. They did a lot to remedy this themselves, but we believe in this project of economic and monetary integration. This phase in the last 10 to 15 years has been under a lot of pressure, and now you see in the financial markets issuing another signal. We do not believe the political commitment or political turbulence, but also in other member countries, fuels this ground. Is the political commitment the same as the one of Mitterrand and Kohl? You see this in the financial markets, and it's forwarded to the European and Italian politics. Can this be maintained? That is a main reason why the President of Italy wants to speak about Europe today. If you want to look to Italy and Germany, as it has been different in the last few years.
Italianen zich niet serieus genomen worden binnen Europa en dat ze minder meetellen dan Frankrijk.
Italians are not being taken seriously. Meloni had a very successful campaign that she wishes to have a stronger position in Europe. What do you expect of this government? Well, I do expect that she's going to continue the consistent line. These are the first signals, but at the same time, I reckon she's going to listen carefully to the concerns of all Europeans, not only Italians, Belgians as well. For example, concerning the European integration, is the project still alive? Is it going to deliver protection? That's what we expect. And then we're almost there. Some people are entering the room. Thank you very much, Mathieu Segers, for this chat.
Het zal even duren voordat iedereen hier een plek heeft. I invite everyone who just enters this room that you can put your headset on and you will find the following channels to follow everything. Under one is Dutch, second is Italian, and the third channel is English. Hierna zal het programma.
Afterwards, the program will be partly in Italian, so those who have not been using a headset so far. Once more, channel 1, Dutch, second channel, Italian, and channel number 3 is English.
Oh, oké. Presidente Mattarella, il nostro illustro relatore di oggi. Benvenuto, eccellenze. Benvenuto governatore della provincia di Limburg.
Welcome to the Governor Limburg, the Mayor of Maastricht, and to the President of the University of Maastricht. And welcome to all of you, and to all those that are following at home. I would like to thank you here for being here today, and I would like to invite the Governor of Limburg to introduce the President of the Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella.
And First Lady Mattarella, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of everybody present here today and those watching from home, and on behalf of the people of Limburg, it's our great honor to meet you here. Welcome to the Government House of Limburg, the southernmost province of the Netherlands. The southernmost province which also has most in common with your country, with Italy. For example, we share a particular past, culture, and Catholic background. A past that can be clearly seen in, around, and between the two cities you will be visiting today, Maastricht and Heerlen. both founded 2,000 years ago by the Romans, the Italians of their day. And in terms of culture, the inhabitants of Limburg very much recognized themselves in the so-called slow movement that was born in Italy. A movement that is all about good and honest food, about il tempo giusto, but above all, about each other and the human dimension. It is no coincidence that half of the Dutch city slow municipalities are here in Limburg. And as for your Catholic backgrounds, yes, the Netherlands is known as a Calvinist country. But here in the south, we have in fact been shaped and molded by the rich tradition of Roman Catholicism. That is maybe why the rest of the country looks at Limburg as their own little Tuscany, where people also come to take a break and get a taste of that better life. But in addition to our past, culture, and religious background, we also share an ambition. After all, we are both keen to build the Einstein telescope in our soil. The soil we used to dig in for coal to heat our country. Many Italians came to help us with the mining. And until around a half century ago, when demand for this black gold waned. It took Limburg a lot of effort to get over that mine closure. It brought us unemployment, poverty, and social disruption. But we managed to pick ourselves up. When the advent of our own university, we now mine knowledge instead of coal. And we now have 4 campuses, together called the Brightlands. 4 campuses spread around the province, each with its own focus on health food, sustainable materials, or smart data, but all 4 also reinforcing each other. To seek and find answers to the challenges facing the world today and in the future. And yes, like Italy, we want to use the Einstein telescope to help unlock the mysteries of the universe. But in addition to our past, culture, religious background, and ambition, we of course share above all significant European heritage with 2 key European treaties. Italy, with the Treaty of Rome, signed 65 years ago at a time when Europe was still recovering from 2 world wars. And when we wanted to stand stronger together against that power bloc on the other side of the Iron Curtain. And Limburg, with the Maastricht Treaty, signed 30 years ago, at a time when the world appeared to be relaxing after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the disappearance of that curtain. A time of freedom and prosperity. Today, we live in a different reality. The climate summit in Egypt shows that we need to stand united in order to provide a future for younger generations worldwide. And I add, with all my heart, that it should not matter where your cradle was in order to have a shot at a good life. And you should never have to abandon your roots, your home, and your family to find it. Ladies and gentlemen, that necessary connection, nationally, European, and globally, demands that we maintain a dialogue, really listening to each other's opinions, to someone from a different generation, and yes, also listening to a true statesman today. A true statesman in the tradition described by the American James Freeman in the 19th century. One who thinks beyond elections, about the next generations, and who does not put the success of his party first, but cares most for the success of his country. Without a doubt, Mr. President Mattarella, this applies to you. You who shouldered the responsibility of remaining president because our current times and your country needed you to do so, and who asked specifically to meet the younger generation here today. Both they and I look forward to listening to you. Also because it is the greatest of honors to us that we wanted to meet you here in Limburg today. Signor Presidente, è con grande piacere.
Mr. President, I am ever so delighted to hand over the floor to you.
Signor Governatore della
Governor of the province of Limburg, I wish to thank you indeed for your kind words of welcome. Madam Mayor of the city of Maastricht, Madam President of the University of Maastricht, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. In 1935, Johann Huizinga published the book entitled In the Shadow of Tomorrow. The book was published in Italy 2 years later, and it was entitled The Crisis of Civilization there, and it was translated by Professor Luigi Einaudi, who would become, in 1948, the first president of the Republic to be elected by the Italian Parliament. In the first few pages of that book, you can read some sentences which appear to be the prophetic image of the extraordinary vision and of the immense merits of the founders of the European integration process, which was yearned for and designed while Europe was experiencing the tragedy of the World War. Huizinga was never able to see that European integration because he was arrested by the Nazis in 1942, and he died while he was confined to a small country in February of 1945. And in 1935, this is what he wrote: "It would not come as a surprise to anyone if tomorrow the madness gave way to a frenzy which would leave our Europe in a state of distracted stupor." But soon thereafter, he added, "Man was never so willing to work, to dare, and to continuously sacrifice his own courage, his own existence for the common good. He has not lost hope." And this is what he added and how he concluded this thought. And 2 years later, he added to the presentation of the Italian edition of the book, "I do not call an optimist he who takes lightly grave dangers, but he who keeps high hopes, even when there appears to be no way out. Hope can only be grounded on the improbable." And this is what Huizinga wrote. The improbable, the possibility that the peoples of Europe, once the fratricidal, tragic war was over, the peoples of Europe would unite and would pursue a common future. This is precisely what occurred. I am delighted to be here today, therefore, together with the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy, to celebrate today in this border town, a connecting town, this important step. It was the Treaty of Maastricht. It was a courageous quality leap in the building of Europe. And of all the elements, I dearly remember the introduction of the concept of European citizenship. I must say I'm honored indeed to be able to speak about this today in this very room where we have delegations. This is where the delegations of the 12 member states of the then European Economic Community negotiated and signed the treaty which became the founding act of the European Union. The European integration path, of course, encountered multiple difficulties and contradictions, and it required an obstinate passion and tireless efforts in trying to understand and harmonize the expectations of the different protagonists involved. The international setting after the Cold War and its evolution naturally played a role in shaping what would follow and what the priorities of the interlocutors would be. Now, there were stumbling blocks along the way from the very start because of tormented clashes and differences and far-sighted agreements on the needs of the delegations of the different governments involved in the negotiations. And I am pleased to say that from the outset, the Netherlands and Italy have worked side by side in this exercise. So the aspiration to a united Europe came after the World War because of the major choice to radically change the course of the history of the relations among the peoples of the continent. At the time, this was supported thanks to the strong ties that the democracies that had reconquered their freedom had, and also thanks to the support of the United States of America and the contribution of a global thinker, a leader who had guided his country in resisting Hitler's actions. Winston Churchill is the man I'm talking about. After the war, freedom and independence was what characterized the rebuilding effort. It couldn't have been otherwise. And in recalling this point, I suppose we're outlining the terms of the challenges that the international community is facing today following the tragic situation that Ukraine is in following the wretched aggression by the Russian Federation. And because it is grounded on the principle of the direct participation of people in decision-making, the direction taken by different countries has not always been univocal and steadfast over the past 70 years. I suppose that positions have been influenced by the policies ensuing from elections held in each state. This is how we can explain the pendulum that came with the building of Europe. In other words, progress and then setbacks, an unstable balance between federalist aspirations and intergovernmental options, the unresolved issue of the relationship of interdependence between states. Now, in actual fact, we see that there are the same protagonists who have chosen either one or the other of these possible fronts. Understanding, increasing mutual trust between partners has been a patient and effective effort. Now, in the beginning, we saw the appearance of forms of association. For example, the Treaty on Mutual Defense at Dunkirk in 1947 between France and the United Kingdom, and it was then extended to include the so-called Benelux countries the following year, and it then became the Western European Union with the entry of the German Federal Republic and the Republic of Italy after it was rejected by the French European Defense Community project. Now, there's a lesson to be learned here. It is, of course, this would enrich the European acquis, and it would be one of the reasons underpinning the integration process. And that was to make it possible to establish the defense institutions that would deter wars in the future. Now, with the Western European Union, this was a silent experience, as it were, and in fact we know that it was then superseded by another defense cooperation effort, the North Atlantic Alliance. Of course, this is all very important, especially if we consider that the Petersburg mission for peacekeeping and crisis management are now a part of the EU treaties, and they were launched in 1992 in that very setting. Now, I also mentioned the theme, the subject of rebuilding, seen as the second pillar. And this is tied to the strong push coming from the United States of America towards the creation of a united interlocutor in Europe with the launch of the Marshall Plan. The European Organization for Economic Cooperation was established in 1948. The aim was to manage the aid provided by the United States of America, but it was actually a wonderful opportunity for understanding and dialogue among the governments of Western European countries who were interested in that kind of operation, and it paved the way for the liberalization of intra-European trade. In turn, this resulted in the establishment of instruments such as the European Payments Union. That was one of the initial experiments in 1950 in the field of monetary cooperation for the continent. And it was possible, thanks to that union, to convert the currencies of the 17 member states. Now, the rebuilding of Europe after the devastation caused by the war brings us to another experience, the ECSC, the European Coal and Steel Community. So it was decided to pool two strategic resources, coal and steel. They were the raw materials needed for armaments in addition to industrial development. Clearly, it was not an easy effort, considering the post-war mistrust at the time. But the 6 founding countries were courageous, and they included the Netherlands and Italy, and they succeeded. So let's think about that achievement for a moment. In 1951, the governments decided to share the power to together determine investments that were to be made, production and commodities markets, workers' wages, and this was all to be done by a collegiate, autonomous institution, the so-called High Authority, which was above the national legislation, as it were. Let us wonder now about this. 70 years later, are we in Europe able to show that same courage? Can we show that same spirit? At least, at the very least. Can we jointly manage the energy, the strategic energy issue that we are tackling today? With regard to the European Coal and Steel Community and the subsequent developments, we come to a distinguished Dutch citizen, Johan Willem Beyen, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs in the early 50s. And in 1955, at the Messina Conference, he illustrated a plan. They were proposing to broaden cooperation, to not only cooperate in the area of coal and steel, but at all levels of the economy in order to have a common market. And 2 years later, in Rome, they would sign the treaty establishing the European Common Market. It wasn't a time for idealists. It was a time for very realistic leaders who had a very crystal clear and courageous vision of the future. Now, I've already mentioned the stumbling blocks that were encountered. They slowed down and sometimes even halted the integration process. I think the most glaring example was that of the European Defence Community, which was rejected in August of 1954, as I mentioned, by the French National Assembly. It was a very sensitive moment. There was another sensitive moment was in 1965, the empty chair policy, empty seat policy, in order to postpone any change with regard to decision making in Europe from one voting system to the qualified majority voting system. Of course, there were other treaties. The referendum for the European Constitutional Treaty in 2005, it was rejected, and therefore we come to the Lisbon Treaty. Of course, it was inadequate considering the breadth of the crises and the goal of making Europe a global protagonist. But there's no reason to be astonished because our Europe, of course, had to experience slack periods in the 1970s and then intense activity periods. And this is what happened with the Single Act and the Maastricht Treaty. And then there were major enlargement processes and, of course, the intense disappointment that came with the failure to ratify the Constitutional Treaty. As mentioned, in any case, there were also times of great hope. For example, the first day that the euro currency circulated and the progressive establishment of that extraordinary space of freedom, which is called the Schengen area. And of course, the continued growth of the Erasmus program and all the capabilities that we have unleashed in order to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences. So over time, we established this notion of European citizenship. We European citizens don't come from nothing, from nowhere. We have been the hardworking builders of our community. And this all started right after the Second World War. Now, if today we can look at the horizons of European citizenship and the single currency and a common foreign and security policy and cooperation in justice and home affairs matters, well, we can do all of this because we owe it to Maastricht. We owe it to that treaty which allowed us to transform our community process into a political union which can go well beyond a simply economic and commercial integration. So this was a milestone. It was the birth of what a staunch advocate of Europe from my country, President David Sassoli, the late President David Sassoli, called a new project of hope. It was based on the aspiration for an ever closer union, as indicated in our treaties. Yet again, the international landscape was important, and it raised profound questions. So we cannot help but wonder what prospects we can imagine for our union, for the peoples of Europe. Historical events cannot be avoided, cannot be neglected. We must wonder whether we have been able to meet the tests that the European Union has encountered, has stumbled upon during this process. Where and when did we go wrong? Were we not open-minded? Were we too greedy with our commitments? Did we dare too little? Do we run the risk of more setbacks and of having to resize our ambitions to a greater extent than the growth which is occurring naturally in other areas? What is it that we want to do with ourselves? What do we want for Europeans, for we Europeans? What are the achievements that our civilization is suggesting? Of course, we are proud bearers and witnesses of this civilization. Now, we need a quality leap, as we did 30 years ago. We need to make courageous and far-sighted choices, because if we were to forego or relinquish this, we would be escaping our responsibilities. We would be resigning ourselves to irrelevance. So we need to make this choice. We need to identify the appropriate instruments that may be used. The entry into force of the Maastricht Treaty was undoubtedly one of the most stimulating moments in our recent history. But we mustn't forget to remember how, already at the time, in the public debate, and perhaps for the first time, we saw this Euroscepticism, latent Euroscepticism in some of our member states with regard to the validity of the integration path that we had embarked upon. The United Kingdom decided at the time to stay outside, to not join the monetary union, and to not sign the agreement on the social policy. And the no vote won in the Danish referendum, and this resulted in a new negotiation and of exceptions even for Copenhagen. So the union, nonetheless, continued along the path it had established.
And this is our recent past, and yet the context we live in has changed very much. We still have plenty of links between the debates which accompanied the Maastricht Treaty and the ones which are currently going on. The tension between a Europe of states or a Europe of citizens was always one of the key ways to interpret the complex European process. The achievements we've reached so far are a hybrid which blend elements of the intergovernmental system and elements of supranationality. Think of the direct link that European citizens have with the election of their European Parliament. Their right to promote legislative initiatives in requesting that the European Commission advance proposals for the implementation of our treaties, or European legislation which is directly applicable in national contexts. And besides, one of our fundamental principles is that sovereignty belongs to citizens. Intergovernmental cooperation, which was long seen by many as the best way to guarantee interests defined as being national, was often the mere outcome of our national productive delays in designing the future. It was more the outcome of a view to the past, of a static vision, rather than a dynamic vision linked to the growth of our civil societies, which, in the meantime, developed in a more European sense. It is a vision which requires us to be updated. The nations which make up the Union live in a European institutional and multicultural plurality which recognizes them and enhances them. Of course, everything can be dismantled, as we saw with Brexit. But can we really ask our peoples to go back to a past which no longer exists? In an increasingly interconnected world, and one characterized by major international players, institutions are very much the outcome of the time they operate in, and they reflect that time. And over the years, we were able to build a multi-level democratic system, albeit an imperfect one, in which in Europe, our citizens are both citizens of a state and citizens of the Union. And through their vote and through their participation, they legitimize public institutions. As the Charter of Fundamental Rights, which has been binding since 2009, affirms that solemnly. We can no longer question the fact that we now have a European interest, an interest of European citizens as such, an interest which transcends and merges our national interests. This is a fact. And the agenda of facts, when it interacts with our political agenda, sets priorities and creates awareness. Which is what happened in 1977, for instance, when the President of the European Commission, Roy Jenkins of Britain, had to revitalize the monetary union following the previous year's Jamaica Accords, which had scrapped fixed exchange rates and had referred to the US dollar as the monetary reference instead of gold. And in 1979, we launched the EMS, the European Monetary System. And the same happened when the pandemic made many of our countries vulnerable, endangering the lives of our populations and disrupting the value chains and disrupting our normal productive flows. The European Union, regarding an issue, health, which didn't fall within its competencies, was capable of intervening effectively. In other words, and our institutions therefore respond to and are shaped by the needs which arise over time. They are shaped on the intelligence with which we face them. And yet, we cannot be content with solutions which are prompted by single events, almost randomly, in a moment in time in which the peace and the very lives of our peoples, in which the future of our youth is so seriously endangered. We cannot ignore the fact that often our institutions are perceived as being distant by our citizens, something we have to try to solve, given the fact that the reasons behind the European project, which were applicable after World War II, are just as important. Distinguished political and academic authorities, dear students, we shouldn't be surprised by the idea that the European Union is far from being perfect. It has been work in progress for the past 70 years, a project we have to work towards every day together. Our concerns, our doubts regarding the European Union's shortcomings should not lead to discomfort or paralyses. They have to urge us to improve it and to strengthen the integration process, to make sure that we are updated with changing times. We are in a fundamental phase regarding the Conference on the Future of Europe. We have seen a high participation in our European people's contribution to the building of the future of the European Union. The European Parliament and the Commission have developed the ideas which emerged from the conference, and European citizens expect a more efficient union, one which is more united based on solidarity, one which can represent us, a true common home, a European Union that have to be capable of being more effective in its actions and interactions, even with the rest of the world. Through our responsibility, through our ability to have a vision, to be mutually loyal to one another, we can increase our sense of belonging to the Union. Of course, this cannot be an all-encompassing outline, but I think that this effort can be useful if we keep 4 fundamental dimensions in mind, beginning with our adhesion to common values, guaranteeing our security and the stability of our continent, rethinking our energy policy, and completing the European Union with the accession processes. First of all, we have to analyze in depth our common sharing of values and principles, which are based on a consistent legal system, one based on the rule of law. Together, we can make up a real community of law, supported by the principle of primacy of the legislation which is decided together in the European context, which is above the national ones, in a structured dialogue, in a constant dialogue between the Court of Justice and the courts of member states, so that we can have a uniform jurisprudential safeguard of both our citizens and businesses from Athens to Dublin, from Helsinki to Lisbon. Secondly, we have to continue in our serious consideration regarding the tools available to us in guaranteeing security and stability to our continent. In other words, we have to identify common goals as far as our foreign and defense policy is concerned, leading to the tangible idea of a European Union strategic autonomy. And it's regrettable to think that during the Helsinki European Council in December 1999, we had already decided to equip ourselves with a military force, with an army corps equal to 50 to 60,000 members of the military, as a tool available to manage crises and to support our foreign policy and our common security policy. Strategic autonomy is needed to achieve the common sovereignty I mentioned earlier, and which is a way of presiding over our freedom and our values, namely peace, democracy, and solidarity. All the more so in this day and age, when facing the serious security crisis that Europe is experiencing. Another crucial element for the European Union's stability and prosperity is the stability and prosperity of our southern neighborhood. The interdependence which exists between the 2 shores of the Mediterranean Sea makes it all the more urgent to invest our political focus on the southern shore. Our response to the challenge posed by migration will only be successful if it is underpinned by solidarity within the EU and by cohesion in our external response and by a far-sighted policy towards the African region. Besides the ethical elements, I think we always have to keep in mind that in just a few decades' time, the population ratio between Africa and the European Union will be equal to 4 to 1. And the countries in that continent, which are equipped with huge amounts of very precious raw materials, and once they develop their organization at an adequate way, will have clout and importance in the international community. And perhaps their attitude towards the European Union will mirror the degree of solidarity we give them and their migrants today. And as we intensify our dialogue with third countries, the countries of origin and transit for migrants, we have to work so that the principles of coordination and shared responsibility between member states can guide our common response to a crucial phenomenon for our very growth outlook. And of course, which means the international community as a whole has to be involved. And the European Union has to be involved in finding effective agreements which can respect the rights of everyone so that together we can shape a common future. Thirdly, we have to rethink our choices regarding our energy policy. It would be useless to make a long list of Europe's frailties, which we have seen over the past few months of war, with the very serious consequences we've had for our peoples on the economic and social levels. This is not a time to hesitate or to make selfish choices. The opposite is true. We have many needs to turn to, and we need to be brave and determined. The progress we've made in recent weeks go in the right direction, beginning with the decision to set a price cap for gas, something which has already led to a drop in energy prices. And at the same time, we have to rethink the European Union's energy policy so that we can look for new sources of procurement, which are in line with our values and our interests, and with the choices we've already made within the framework of the Green Deal, and in line with our foreign policy goals. The European Union was a formidable platform which has disseminated stability and values around it. And we were able to achieve our principle, which is that of not having enemies at our doorstep. Without that, without our continuity and credibility in terms of our cooperation policy, unless we complete our design to enlarge the Union from Ukraine to the Western Balkans, to whom we promised accession in 2003 already, we would create a void which would be filled by other players whose values and interests are different from ours. This is, in fact, a geostrategic investment, the advantages of which are much higher than the disadvantages which would be the outcome of a union closed in on itself, one incapable of setting and defining global targets and agreements with our neighbors. Distinguished political and academic authorities, dear students, I have the pleasure to speak to you at the end of a state visit which has reiterated and renewed the friendship between our countries. A real friendship, not a superficial one, which just allows an honest discussion on topics in which our initial stances appear to be distant. The Netherlands and Italy, both of which are founding countries of the Union, share the vision of a Europe which is open to the world, one which promotes solid values, which is focused on our social rights. The strength of Europe is its ability to bring together those who are different and to find tangible solutions between the meetings of positions which tend to be irreconcilable. For this reason, and in accepting the much appreciated invitation by their Majesties, the King and Queen of the Netherlands, I wanted to conclude my state visit here and in neighboring Heerlen. Maastricht is an example of success, and it testifies to the fact that negotiations and compromise aren't something which can lead to minimum agreements. The contrary is true. They can lead to creative and innovative solutions which can benefit all those who are committed honestly to supporting their reasons, and those who are also, of course, willing to listen to one another. Recently, even over the past few years, European leaders, when facing existential crises for the Union, proved to be up to the task they were facing. And I'm sure that in the future, our two countries, together with the other member states and the candidate countries, will be able to offer Europe high and ambitious outlooks by being inspired by the same atmosphere that led to the treaty here. Thank you very much, and I wish all of us all the very best.
Grazie mille, Sua Eccellenza, Signor Presidente.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, President Mattarella, for your words, for your address, which is very stimulating, very moving, very beautiful, and you've gone over this historical moment, and you've talked about how to reach a compromise. This room is an excellent example of how that can be done. We have students, research, professors, and we have people here who would love to ask you questions if this is at all possible. So for the question, I have Zakaria Al-Shmali, who is a PhD fellow from Syria, right? Thank you. President, my name is Zakaria.
United in foreign policy, but is also bitterly divided on areas such as the rule of law and asylum policy. In the time of mainstream populism that we live in today, what can the EU do to ensure that its founding principles are not compromised on in the name of unity in these difficult times? Thank you.
Può ripetere le sue parole, per favore, più vicino al microfono?
Sì.
Può ripetere le ultime parole?
Could you please repeat the last two phrases of your question?
What can the EU do to protect its founding principle against populists in the name who use unity to compromise on these values? Thank you.
Sotto il nome dell'unità.
So, I apologize because I hadn't yet put on my headphones. So, you're talking about the danger represented by those who don't believe in the Union. Well, the Union is a community of values. It is not simply a collection of states that have to cooperate in economic terms or even strategically. It is a community of values, and without that, it would lose its raison d'être. Well, there is a problem now, and it pertains to all different dimensions. And I'm talking here about tools used for communication. They have changed so much in recent times. In recent times, in fact, we've seen a proliferation of tools that can facilitate communication. Now, your question referred to populism and the dangers of misinformation or disinformation. Well, the instruments offered today by the web, by the social media, are an extraordinary opportunity to see the growth of the improvement of the human condition and the way in which we relate to one another. So this is an extraordinary growth that we are witnessing. It means huge progress for us. Of course, with every discovery that comes, the achievements will depend on how the discoveries are used, and some tools or instruments can be used in a distorted manner, tools coming from science, from scientific research. So I think we've got to combat this phenomenon of disinformation, which often appears to be very superficial. In fact, it is not insightful at all. Now, this is a problem which shows that in public institutions of any size, there doesn't seem to be a mature relationship with the new tools for communication. So we still need to learn how to communicate with our citizens with these new communication tools. So this, of course, is important for citizens, but also for institutions, because they are the ones who have to find a better way to use these new communication tools. But I am optimistic when it comes to this point and the attitude of the Union. And that is that I see that more and more over time, we have new European generations who feel this very strongly. And this is why they are not skeptical about European integration. And even just now, in recent times, we've seen evidence of this. The war in Ukraine is a very, very serious and sensitive issue. Now, all European countries have been bombed with fake news coming from Russia, and this hasn't really impacted the public opinion, however. In fact, the European Union has supported Ukraine very firmly, and all the public opinions agree with this support. And this shows that we can resist this kind of disinformation, which is highly widespread, and that's why I feel optimistic about this.
Per la prossima domanda.
Now, we'll move on to the next question, which will be asked by Mauro Ciocci. Please wait a moment. We want perhaps you to ask the question in Italian. Yes, thank you. Thank you. My name is Mauro, and I am the former president of the Council of Students in Tuscany. So I'm here by coincidence. In any case, nowadays, in the current political debate, there is a split, undeniably a split between generations. The younger generations have a different and often opposed interest or vision of what the world should look like. Now, in light of the fact that 2022 is the European Union's Year of the Youth, my question is this: how can we reconcile the generational difference that has come into being? Is it the responsibility of youth to do so? Or is it the responsibility of the political class in general and of the institutions? Are they the ones who should give youth the opportunity to participate actively in political discourse and in decision-making? So in other words, do the youth have to find a way to be heard, or is it the political class that must just listen to our youth? That's an excellent question, I must say. Well, first of all, I wish to say that I agree with what you have said. Youth have different prospects and sensitivities than those of the previous generations. I've seen many generations considering my age, and I've seen over time that this is precisely what happens. And this is therefore the problem that must be dealt with by those with institutional responsibilities, and even for youth. Each generation, especially now, since life is so fast-paced, so frenetic, the change is just so swift and unexpected. So we know that there are different targets and goals and sensitivities that are different from those of the previous generations. So we have multiple themes and issues that are of importance for youth, and they are a priority for those who are running our institutions. We know that sometimes things are distorted or deformed. You rule thinking of the future. That means that you have to think and take care of the issues that are dear to youth. But it isn't only a focus on youth here. You've also got to let them participate in the decision-making process. They must be allowed to do so, even when it comes to political horizons and prospects. Now, the Conference on the Future of Europe tried to offer our youth a platform that they could participate in, and what came of that was quite interesting, I must say. And it is a happy coincidence to see that the conference ended in the Year of the Youth, on that same year. So it is important to understand what the goals and targets are for youth and what they tell the institutions they are. So we have to acknowledge those issues and those sensitivities. We have to increase our contacts with youth, because they are the ones who need to directly participate in the establishment of political policies and making decisions. Now, we have to be on the same page with youth. We don't always understand what they're telling us when they talk about the future. When our youth today talk about the climate, for example, and when they talk about the huge transitions that are underway, the ecological and the digital transition, so digital is important too, of course, they talk about solidarity. They talk about the fact that peace has deleted from their memory the memory of war. So this is what happens. So our youth have issues to raise, and they have to be priorities in our policy. So we need to be on the same page with our youth. As I said, we need to understand their issues and realize that we must, in the political institution, in the public institutions, take them on board. So this is what I think I should say to answer your question. And again, I wish to underscore that these two transitions that are underway are indeed a priority for the European Union. Thank you.
Grazie. Prima di andare alla...
Thank you very much. And before moving on to the final question, I have a question myself. And in Italy, we always have we always see the European flag at the institutions. It's here today in Maastricht, but we don't see this normally in the Netherlands. Now, Italy, of course, is pro-European, but in the past few years, there's also been Euroscepticism in Italy as well. Have you seen a change in the way Europe is perceived in Italy, President? It's a virus. It's like the COVID virus, which has hit everybody, I would say, which has affected everybody. And the latest statistics in Italy on accession to Europe and joining the euro are positive. So fortunately, this is a reassuring trend. The skepticism is declining. And now Luana Russo has the floor. Again, she's Italian. She's an assistant professor in quantitative methods at Maastricht University. I suppose she'll also ask her question in Italian. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. President. I would like to ask you what you think about the impact of global challenges on the European decision-making structure. We've seen in the past few years that as Europeans, we are regularly confronted with very complex challenges that require cooperation and shared systems and approaches. Even most populist parties now seem to understand that sovereignism might be a viable strategy in times of peace. But when a country faces challenges such as a pandemic, spiraling energy costs, or war, it is pivotal to have international infrastructure with solid procedures to rely on. However, in the European institutional design, countries' heads of government often have the final say in important strategic and even crucial policy domains. So what are the limits of this institutional design, and what challenges does this pose? Well, I suppose the first thing I'm going to say is quite obvious. The unanimous vote has been overcome. In fact, it was used minimally at some point because it becomes a right to veto, which paralyzes the Union. And we know that crises are before us all the time. They are looming all the time. So we need decisions to be made quickly and not belatedly. That's one problem. So another point refers to the fact that crises are looming all the time, and that is that the Union needs to remove this limit that exists. We need something which is more positive. In other words, we have to complete our internal design, as it were. Now, Europe, in some respects, is a building which has not yet been completed, a home which is not yet complete. We can't imagine a union with a common currency without a common fiscal policy. Now, we see this in other sectors as well. This might last a few more years, but it cannot be a permanent condition, because when a building has not been completed, then the part that's missing will end up destroying the part that's already been built. So in order to preserve what we've already built for Europe, we've got to improve its organization. And when it comes to economic and financial matters, Europe must still define these. It's going to be difficult because of the differences of opinion, but we've always had those differences in many areas. of the Union, we've always found some sort of equilibrium and some, point of confluence. This is essential. We can have fast-paced decision-making processes so we can overcome the unanimous vote affair. But we must complete the internal structure, the internal organization of the Union, because without that, we will not be able to handle all the problems that appear. This is how we can overcome crises, which, as I said, are always looming. They are frequent. And these are crises that require that we have decision-making capacity, and we need to have a solid ability to analyze and must not be fragmented at all in this analysis. Thank you.
Sua Eccellenza, signor Presidente.
Your Excellency, Mr. President Sergio Mattarella, I think I'm speaking on behalf of everyone. We would have loved to be here with you for hours and hours, but we are going to thank you very much indeed for the time that you have dedicated to us, for your lecture, and you've spoken about Europe as a home that we have to protect. It is a building that has not yet been completed, but you said you are hopeful, you are optimistic, and if you are, then we can say we are as well. At this point, we can complete the official session, and I invite you, Mr. President, and all our guests of honor to please rise, because we know you have to leave. I would ask everyone else to stay seated. Thank you so very much, Mr. President. Thank you. I would just like to add one more thing. The President wishes to add one more thing. Yes, we shouldn't be too upset by the crisis, because Europe, as Monet said, will learn how to live through the crises.
Grazie di cuore, grazie mille. Salve. Sì. Salve. Certo, allora le mando una mail. Sì, immagino. Allora mando una mail a questo numero. Het voelt nu toch een beetje raar om nog op het podium te staan, dingen te zeggen. Dit gaat toch vanzelf nu wel zo'n beetje? Goed, hè? Ja, ging goed, toch? Ja? Aardig is hij. Toch? Aardig. Ja, en een hele bijzondere en intelligente, maar ook gewoon heel aardig. Wat? Heel mooi uit en zo. Ja, ja. Wel of het eurosceptisch als een soort virus. Nou ja, gewoon... Ja, toch? Als ik nog heel veel jullie aandacht mag, dan wil ik iedereen hier uitnodigen. I will do it in English. For coming here, you can see everything back on YouTube on Café Europa Maastricht. And now we would like to invite you to the reception outside and to join us over there. Thank you so much for your attendance today. Thank you.